They were Gene Hackman's closest friends. They were the last ones to see him alive. And now, they are handcuffed right before the flashing lights of dozens of reporters. Daniel and Barbara Lenihan, familiar faces to Heckman, are now the prime suspects in one of the most thrilling cases in Hollywood. What did the Santa Fe police find in their home? A confession? An undeniable clue? Or a conspiracy even bigger than anyone could imagine? Santa Fe had never been a place for major upheavals. This land, with sunsets stretching across the desert, had once been a peaceful hideaway for Gene Heckman and Betsy Arakawa. They lived quietly, far from the glamorous lights of Hollywood, enjoying their later years surrounded by nature and the tranquility of New Mexico. However, the day the Santa Fe police knocked on their door, that serenity was shattered forever. A terrifying discovery rocked the entire town, causing the peaceful locals, accustomed to a slow-paced life, to shudder in fear. The investigation quickly took an unexpected turn toward a couple familiar to Heckman, two of his longtime friends, Daniel and Barbara Lenihan. From trusted friends, they became suspects, drawn into the whirlwind of an unimaginable mystery. Santa Fe, known for its cobblestone streets, adobe houses, and vast blue skies, had a population of just over 80,000 people, making it not the usual setting for shocking criminal cases. The townsfolk were used to a relaxed pace, enjoying quiet afternoons in small cafes or wandering through art galleries. But one March morning, the sound of police sirens rang out along the suburban streets, shattering the calm. Heckman's once peaceful home became the center of an investigation no one could have predicted. "We never thought something like this could happen here," whispered a local resident as they watched the police barricade around Heckman's house. "This is Santa Fe. Things like this just don't happen." But this time, it had happened. And it was more shocking than anything Santa Fe had ever witnessed. Gene Heckman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were not fans of the limelight. After decades in the film industry, Heckman chose to distance himself from Hollywood, rejecting interviews and offers to return to the screen. They lived in a modest yet spacious home, surrounded by the pristine wilderness of New Mexico. Those who had met Heckman on the street often remarked that he was a calm, reserved man, a true gentleman of Hollywood's golden age. Betsy, his wife, was a gentle yet determined woman. Though not a prominent name in entertainment, she was the quiet companion behind the life of a Hollywood legend. They had a peaceful marriage, free of scandals, and rarely appeared in public. However, close friends had started to notice a change in recent months. Heckman, once proud of his independence and sharpness, had begun to seem distant and increasingly difficult to understand. Some close friends even mentioned that they no longer recognized the Heckman they once knew. Daniel and Barbara Lenihan were not strangers to Gene Heckman and Betsy Arakawa. They had known each other for decades, since Heckman had first moved to New Mexico and developed an unexpected interest: maritime history and underwater archaeology. Daniel Lenihan was a renowned marine archaeologist. He and Heckman had co-authored a book on underwater exploration, a collaboration that had lasted many years. Barbara, Daniel's wife, was an intelligent and sharp woman, always able to build relationships and win people over. The two families appeared very close. Daniel and Heckman would often spend hours discussing historical stories, shipwrecks, and the secrets buried beneath the ocean floor. Betsy and Barbara also had a good relationship, frequently meeting to talk about art, literature, and life. However, what seemed like a solid relationship was starting to show cracks. Those who knew Heckman began to notice a change recently. Gene Heckman looked more haggard than before, as if something was weighing heavily on him. Betsy Arakawa appeared less frequently than usual, and her meetings with friends became increasingly rare. Some neighbors even recalled hearing tense arguments from Heckman's house, something that had rarely occurred before. The most notable thing was that Daniel and Barbara Lenihan had been visiting Heckman more frequently, but no one knew what they had been discussing. Things came to a head when an emergency call was made from Heckman's house. When the police arrived, they couldn't believe what they saw. A room that had been ransacked. Signs of a hasty departure, but no signs of forced entry. Something was hidden. And then they discovered irrefutable evidence, leading them to a completely different line of investigation. Daniel and Barbara Lenihan. What had really happened in Heckman's house? Were Daniel and Barbara Lenihan truly involved? Or were they victims of an unfortunate series of events? Santa Fe, once a peaceful town, had now become the center of a thrilling investigation, one where every new detail revealed sent shivers down the spine as the hidden truth slowly came to light. The answer lies ahead, and what is about to unfold may be even more frightening than anyone could have imagined. Daniel Lenihan, with a deep but steady voice, spoke to the police. Gene was not the same man anymore. We saw it. Everyone who knew him saw it. This statement immediately caught the attention of the investigators. Gene Heckman, a man once known for his strength and decisiveness, was no longer himself? Daniel continued, describing how, over the past year, he and his wife had witnessed a concerning decline in Heckman's condition. His memory had worsened, and he would occasionally forget stories they had just shared. He began to show signs of irritability, becoming easily agitated, and sometimes lost control of his emotions. There were times when Gene would look at us, and it was like he didn't even recognize who we were. Barbara Lenihan nodded in agreement. She added, Betsy was doing everything she could to keep him grounded. She really was. She recalled how Betsy had made every effort to help Heckman maintain his mental clarity. She spent hours reading with him, walking in the garden together, and even used cognitive exercises to help him stay sharp. But it wasn't enough. Heckman continued to drift further away, losing control and at times displaying troubling behavior. We were all worried, Barbara said, her voice somewhat choked. We just didn't know what to do. As all suspicions focused on Daniel and Barbara Lenihan, their son, Aaron Lenihan, came forward with a surprising testimony. Aaron, a neurologist, had spent time with Gene Heckman in his final months. He not only visited as a family friend, but also as a professional able to assess Heckman's mental state. I saw the signs, Aaron admitted, and I told Betsy what I thought. When asked what signs he had noticed, Aaron explained that Heckman might have been suffering from a form of neurological disorder, possibly Alzheimer's or another cognitive decline. The clear signs included severe short-term memory loss. Heckman would forget conversations that had just taken place. Mood swings. 1 minute he could be laughing, and the next he'd become irrationally angry. Mild paranoia. Heckman would sometimes distrust those around him, even Betsy. Aaron confirmed that Betsy was fully aware of this. She had attempted to reach out to doctors, seeking help, but Heckman, with his stubborn personality, refused any medical intervention. This raised an important question. Did Heckman's decline affect the decisions he made during that time? And more importantly, if anyone had taken advantage of his condition, could it have been Daniel and Barbara Lenihan? While Daniel and Barbara Lenihan emphasized their concern for Heckman, the police couldn't overlook some suspicious details in their testimony. Why did Daniel and Barbara visit Heckman more frequently in his final months when they hadn't done so before? Was Heckman really suffering from memory loss, or was he deliberately avoiding them for some unknown reason? Did Betsy actually ask them for help, or had she tried to distance them from her and her husband's life? Another important detail the police noticed was the change in Heckman's finances. In the 6 months before the tragedy, Heckman made several unusual financial transactions. Some of his bank accounts showed transfers that didn't have clear explanations. And in all of these transactions, one name kept appearing: Daniel Lenihan. From a couple who were once seen as caring for Gene Heckman, Daniel and Barbara Lenihan now found themselves as potential suspects. The police began to dig deeper into their financial history, their interactions with Heckman, and most importantly, Betsy Arakawa's statement before everything transpired. Had they truly exploited Heckman's cognitive decline for personal gain? Or were they simply concerned friends, caught up in a tragic story that no one could control? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain: the mystery was far from over. As the police continued their investigation, they were about to uncover a truth even more shocking. What truly happened in the final months of Gene Heckman's life? The answer was right before their eyes, but would it lead to justice or merely push everything into an even more dangerous spiral? Santa Fe was no stranger to mysterious cases, but the arrest of Daniel and Barbara Lenihan by the police caused an unprecedented shock. The long-married couple, once considered close friends of Gene Heckman and Betsy Arakawa, had now become the primary suspects. The arrest order wasn't rushed. The police had spent weeks investigating, tracing every small detail, from conflicting testimonies to suspicious financial evidence, before deciding to take action. But exactly what had led the Santa Fe police to intervene? What had they uncovered? And most importantly, were Daniel and Barbara truly involved in the tragedy of Gene Heckman and Betsy Arakawa? That morning, as the sun rose over the New Mexico mountains, a convoy of police cars unexpectedly stopped in front of Daniel and Barbara Lenihan's house. The neighbors, familiar with the peaceful calm of Santa Fe, were awakened by the flashing police lights and the incessant knocking at the door. Daniel opened the door, his face still sleepy. But in just a few seconds, he realized this was no ordinary visit. "Daniel and Barbara Lenihan, you are under arrest." The cold words shattered the quiet morning atmosphere. Daniel froze, his mouth slightly open but unable to speak. Barbara, who had just stepped out of the bedroom, screamed in panic. The police gave them no time to react, quickly handcuffing both of them and leading them away. A few neighbors stood watching, their expressions a mix of astonishment. "They're good people. How could this happen?" one muttered. But what the police had uncovered over the past few weeks painted a very different picture of the Lenihan family. From the very beginning of the case, Daniel and Barbara Lenihan had insisted they were simply concerned friends of Heckman. However, as the police reviewed their testimonies, a suspicious pattern began to emerge. The couple repeatedly changed their statements about the last time they saw Gene Heckman. Initially, they said they visited him in the evening, but later claimed it was early the next morning. The times didn't match the surveillance camera data in the area. They seemed overly interested in Heckman's legal procedures just before the tragedy occurred. According to the testimony of a lawyer, Daniel had inquired about Heckman's will just a few weeks before, something he had never shown interest in before. They were present at Heckman's house the fateful night, but did not immediately report to the police. This raised a big question. What had they done during that time? When questioned about these discrepancies, Daniel and Barbara were unable to provide reasonable explanations. They dodged, avoided the topic, and sometimes appeared irritated when pressed too deeply. This led the police to believe they might be hiding something. The biggest breakthrough came from phone data. During the investigation, the police requested the call and message history of Heckman, Betsy Arakawa, and Daniel and Barbara Lenihan. What they found completely changed the direction of the case. On the night the tragedy occurred, Heckman's phone had an unanswered call from an unknown number. After checking, the police discovered it was a prepaid phone number owned by Daniel Lenihan. Betsy Arakawa's phone contained a message sent to a close friend at 10:47 p.m. that night, with the simple message, "I think something is wrong." Location data showed that Daniel had been near Heckman's house at a time he claimed he was not there. This led the police to consider a new scenario. Had Daniel and Barbara gone to Heckman's house that night? And if so, what had really happened in that house? While the police were investigating the details surrounding that fateful night, another team of experts focused on Heckman's recent financial transactions. And once again, they discovered irregularities. A large sum of money was transferred from Heckman's account to another account just a week before the tragedy occurred. The receiving account belonged to a small company in Santa Fe, but when the police looked further into it, they found that the actual owner of the company was Daniel Lenihan. Additionally, an unfinished legal document was found on Betsy Arakawa's computer, indicating that she might have been planning to change the content of Heckman's will just before everything happened. These pieces of evidence painted a troubling picture. Were Daniel and Barbara trying to gain control of Heckman's assets? With all the evidence gathered, the police could not wait any longer. They proceeded to arrest Daniel and Barbara Lenihan to prevent any actions that could affect the investigation. But the case still had many unanswered questions. What exactly did Daniel and Barbara do that night? Were they involved in a scheme to profit from Heckman? Or were they innocent people caught up in a tragic, mysterious event? The arrest was just the beginning of a legal battle that could last for months, or even years. The police believed the answers were within the data they had collected, but to get the clearest picture, they needed more. Would justice be served, or was this just the opening act for an even more complex case? The answers would slowly emerge, but only when all the mysteries were uncovered. With Gene Hackman's reputation, many view him as a Hollywood legend living simply, detached from the glamour of the entertainment industry. But even after retreating to Santa Fe to enjoy his retirement with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, Heckman still possessed an astounding fortune. The question arises, could this fortune be connected to the mysterious chain of events surrounding him? Recent investigations into Heckman's finances have begun to show troubling signs, especially the link between him and Daniel and Barbara Lenihan, two longtime friends who have now become suspects. Daniel and Barbara Lenihan were not just ordinary friends of Heckman. They also had financial ties that few were aware of. Daniel had been involved in several investment projects with Heckman, from real estate to personal investments. But there's one odd thing. Many of the transactions between the two were not properly documented. In the later years of his life, Heckman had transferred large sums of money to an account with an unclear origin. When the police traced the funds, they discovered this account had an indirect connection to a company registered under Daniel Lenihan's name. Barbara Lenihan, once an amateur financial advisor, had access to some of Heckman's personal accounts. But the question remains, did she exploit this trust to manipulate his finances? This information left the police with no choice but to consider the possibility. Could Heckman have been financially manipulated without even realizing it? One of the most important details in the investigation is Heckman's will. For many years, Heckman had kept his will relatively simple, leaving most of his assets to his wife, Betsy Arakawa, with a few charitable funds inherited according to his personal wishes. But an unexpected turn came when the police discovered an unfinished version of the will on Arakawa's computer. This version of the will contained a crucial difference. Daniel and Barbara Lenihan were listed as heirs. The amount they were set to inherit was not insignificant, estimated at millions of dollars. This version of the will showed signs of having been altered shortly before the tragedy occurred. Why the change? Was Heckman coerced into adjusting his inheritance? Or did Betsy Arakawa suspect something and decide to change it herself? What's even more telling, this version of the will was incomplete, and it seemed Heckman had not officially signed it. If the old will were still valid, Lenihan would not have received anything. Could this be the reason they needed to intervene in Heckman's final days? Although from the outside, Daniel and Barbara Lenihan appeared to lead stable lives, when the police delved deeper into their financial records, another story began to emerge. Lenihan was in massive debt. They had invested in an unsuccessful real estate project and were now facing enormous financial pressure. Daniel had previously attempted to borrow money from Heckman, but Heckman had refused, perhaps because he didn't want to get entangled in his friend's financial troubles. An internal email was discovered revealing that Barbara Lenihan had discussed securing financial resources in case Heckman was unable to make timely decisions. This raises a terrifying possibility. Did Lenihan have a financial motive to influence Heckman's decisions in his final days? A critical element in the investigation was Betsy Arakawa's role. She wasn't just Heckman's wife, but also the person who knew his assets better than anyone. Betsy had been suspicious of Daniel and Barbara's motives. A close friend of hers revealed that Betsy had been concerned about Heckman being exploited. Betsy might have tried to change the will to exclude them, but she didn't have time to complete it before the tragedy struck. Betsy's final call on that fateful night might also be a clue. Did she discover something? If there truly was a financial conspiracy, Betsy might have been the only one to realize it, and perhaps that made her a target? The investigation into Heckman's finances is gradually revealing a complex picture, where Daniel and Barbara Lenihan are no longer simply close friends, but could have much deeper motives. But there are still unanswered questions. Did Heckman truly change his will because he wanted to? Or was his decision influenced by someone? Did Betsy Arakawa truly suspect Daniel and Barbara? If so, what was her plan? If there was a conspiracy, who was the mastermind? Daniel? Barbara? Or were they both involved in planning? One thing is certain. Gene Hackman's fortune was not just the legacy of a Hollywood legend. It could very well be the key to unraveling the entire case. As the police continue to piece together the missing elements, the truth seems to be drawing closer. But will it be enough to uncover the full conspiracy? The investigation into the deaths of Gene Heckman and Betsy Arakawa has entered a new phase, with the Santa Fe police expanding their focus beyond the Lenihan household. Daniel and Barbara Lenihan remain central figures, but is it truly only them who are involved in this case? New clues have emerged from Heckman's phone records, legal documents, and, notably, the strange death of Heckman's dog, Zinna, which has led investigators to propose a chilling theory. Could this not just be a personal incident, but a broader conspiracy with multiple masterminds lurking in the shadows? Initially, the police focused entirely on Daniel and Barbara Lenihan. But as they dug deeper into Heckman's financial transactions, a more complex picture began to unfold. There are large sums of money Heckman transferred for unclear reasons in the 6 months leading up to the event. Some accounts receiving these funds are linked to a law firm in New Mexico, which has represented several powerful figures in the region. An unidentified individual contacted Heckman multiple times in the final days of his life, but their identity remains unknown. As the police traced the financial transactions and phone data, they realized that at least 2 other individuals might be involved. 2 names appeared on the list of suspects: Henry Salazar, a veteran lawyer in Santa Fe who had worked with Heckman on legal matters related to his estate; Victor Grayson, a businessman involved in real estate projects in which Heckman was also involved. Both of these individuals had contact with Daniel Lenihan before the case unfolded. Could Daniel and Barbara have not acted alone? After seizing Heckman's personal phone and documents, the police discovered multiple suspicious calls in recent weeks. There were 17 calls between Heckman and an unregistered number in the 2 weeks leading up to the tragedy. Betsy Arakawa also contacted this number once on the final night, but no one knows what the conversation entailed. A message found on Heckman's phone read, "We need to meet before it's too late." As the police delved deeper, they noticed some of Heckman's legal documents had gone missing from his lawyer's office. A real estate contract Heckman had signed with Victor Grayson contained suspicious clauses related to property transfers. An unsent letter found among Heckman's personal files seemed to mention someone pressuring him to change his will. What do these findings mean? Had Heckman discovered a plot against him, and was he trying to act before it was too late? Zinna, Heckman's loyal dog, had been his companion for over a decade. When police searched Heckman's home, they found that Zinna had also passed away mysteriously, just days before Heckman did. What happened to Zinna? The autopsy report for Zinna revealed traces of a mild poison in its body. Neighbors reported that they had seen Zinna acting strangely in the last week before its death. Betsy Arakawa had once told a friend that Zinna had become increasingly frantic whenever strangers approached the house. Could this have been a mere coincidence, or had someone tested a plan before making a move? If so, had Zinna sensed the danger before Heckman did? The Santa Fe police investigation is becoming increasingly complicated. Daniel and Barbara Lenehan remain the prime suspects, but now other figures have entered the spotlight. The biggest questions remain unanswered. Did Heckman really change his will under duress, or did he do it voluntarily? What role did Henry Salazar and Victor Grayson play in this entire affair? Did Betsy Arakawa know something that the police have yet to uncover? Was Zinna truly the first victim of this conspiracy? One thing is certain. The deeper the police dig, the more they realize that this is not a simple case. It is a sophisticated conspiracy that may have been planned long before. The curtain of mystery has not yet been fully lifted, and the truth may be even more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The investigation that has stretched over many months has led everyone into a maze of confusion, with suspicions, conspiracy, and truths intertwining. When the Santa Fe police officially brought charges against Daniel and Barbara Lenehan, many believed the curtain had fallen on this dramatic affair. But was it truly over? Did Heckman's two longtime friends really have a hand in his mysterious passing? Or were they merely pawns in a much larger game? The Santa Fe police gathered enough evidence to make an arrest, but is that enough to conclude everything? Let's revisit the clues gathered and face the final truth. When the Santa Fe police formally arrested Daniel and Barbara Lenehan, public opinion immediately split into two opposing views. One side believes the couple had a clear motive to interfere in Heckman's final days, possibly involving his estate and will. The other side believes the Lenehans were framed, and a greater force might be behind the entire story. So, what evidence does the police have to charge them? Conflicting testimony. Initially, Daniel and Barbara claimed they were not present at Heckman's house in his final days. However, data from mobile phones and nearby surveillance cameras show they were at the location at least 3 times during suspicious periods. Altered financial documents. A copy of Heckman's will found at the Lenehans' house showed signs of being tampered with the names of some beneficiaries changed. Chemical traces in food. Forensic reports indicated traces of a sedative compound in the food Heckman consumed in his final days. All these pieces of evidence suggest possible interference. But is that enough to prove that Daniel and Barbara are the masterminds? Based on the gathered evidence, Daniel and Barbara Lenehan were charged with 3 main accusations. Elder abuse. If the court determines they negatively influenced Heckman in his final days, this could become a serious felony. Forgery of legal documents. The discovery of the altered will could lead to charges of legal fraud. Obstruction of justice. During the investigation, it was alleged that the Lenahans attempted to conceal key information, including deleting certain messages from Heckman's phone. If convicted, they could face up to 20 years in prison. However, the Lenahans' lawyer quickly voiced their defense, arguing that the police were targeting them simply because they were the last to have contact with Heckman. But no direct evidence has yet been found to prove they were responsible for the death. This means the case is far from closed. The biggest question still up for debate is, did Gene Heckman pass away from natural causes, or was there a secret plan behind it all? Hypothesis 1. A natural tragedy. Some experts argue that Heckman, being of advanced age and in poor health, could have naturally passed away. This would mean his death wasn't the result of a conspiracy, but rather an inevitable outcome based on natural law. Hypothesis 2. A purposeful conspiracy. However, numerous clues suggest that someone may have interfered in Heckman's final days. His will was altered just before his death. Phone records show he had unusual calls with several strangers. Heckman's loyal dog Zinna also passed away in strange circumstances just before Heckman. All these elements make it hard to believe that the situation was simply a natural death. Whether Daniel and Barbara Lenahan are convicted or not, one major question remains unanswered. Who stands to gain the most from Heckman's death? If Daniel and Barbara are truly the perpetrators, was their motive just money? If a larger force is behind this, who are they? Has the police really uncovered all the pieces of this puzzle? As the case draws to a close, an even darker truth may still be buried in the shadows. The public has been eagerly awaiting a clear answer to Heckman's death. Yet, even at this moment, too many mysteries remain unresolved. If Daniel and Barbara Lenahan are guilty, what was their true motive? If they are innocent, who is really behind all this? Is there a larger conspiracy the police have yet to uncover? What seemed like a simple case has turned into a complex story full of unresolved questions. And no matter what verdict the court reaches, the most important question still stands. What is the final